John, we're so happy to have you. We really appreciate you. And I want to just say how grateful I am that you have been serving, you and Brett have served on our Safety and Environmental Committee. It's a sacrifice, and you've been very, very helpful. You were very helpful in planning and participating in our very first safety and environmental conference that we had in February, which went really, really well. We had great feedback. So we do thank you for being a member of the association and for giving your time and energy to help our members. And rather than me try to introduce you more than that, why don't you take just a moment and let people know who you are, a little bit about your background, and then dive in and we'll have some time. I think you asked about some interaction. I think that's up to you. If you want to solicit some before the end, before you get to the Q&A, that's up to you, but I'm turning it over to you at this point, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. And just want to say it's been a pleasure getting to participate in these things. I've had a great time getting to know you better and seeing what you and Emily and Joseph and the whole team are building here. And yeah, we look forward to being a part of that for years and hopefully decades to come. I'll go straight to the presentation and we'll start. My name is John Anderson. And by the way, I'm sharing screens. Let's see, Emily, is that right? You want me to share screens? Hold on a second. Let me set that up. Let's see here. Okay. All right, let me know when you guys can see. Okay, it's trying. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. Bill, Emily, can y'all see it? It says it's sharing.
I can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, you know, I was thinking about what to talk about today, and well, let me give you some background. My name is John Anderson, and I'm one of the principals in M.A. Anderson Associates. We're a full-service environmental engineering firm, and we handle groundwater, surface water, air, soil, more and more. As the regulations dictate, we are moving just with the industry towards stormwater compliance, and especially in this concrete industry. I manage several concrete companies throughout the Southeast, and what I want to talk about today is some things for all of us to be thinking about in the event of an environmental crisis. So lately, and more, the past few years, we've been having to respond to emergency situations and make sure when there's an environmental crisis, the environment is taken care of. And so I'm going to go through a case study of one we had recently in South Atlanta, and we're going to talk about what happened and then some things to think about environmentally. And I'd love for you guys to chime in and give me your thoughts and how to protect the surrounding properties. And so this one was an industrial stormwater emergency in South Atlanta here recently, and we're going to go through it. So this right here is the subject property. By the way, can y'all see my mouse or just the screen?
Mouse too.
Okay. I see both. I see both.
Perfect. So this is an industrial facility right here. This, by the way, this is not a concrete facility, but I think everything we talk about today applies perfectly to concrete facilities also. And so let me just give you guys some background about how I think about things from an environmental perspective. And so when I'm thinking about a site, whether it's an emergency or just normal ongoing compliance, I think about there being a bubble over the site. So you can imagine, you know, a big soap bubble where the site is placed inside that bubble. Okay, and it's just the site inside that bubble. Everything that goes through the wall of that bubble is an environmental issue. So whether it's going down through the base of the bubble, whether it's going out the side of the bubble, and I've tried to draw a bubble over the site right here, you can imagine anything that escapes the walls of the bubble, this is an environmental issue, okay? Now, anything that happens inside the bubble, anything that does not escape the bubble, I think about that more as an OSHA issue. So that would be less of an EPA or EPD or ADEM or any of the state agencies. They're not so concerned about what's happening inside the bubble, but as soon as a pollutant leaves that bubble, that's where they're concerned. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Y'all feel free to chime in. I like having an interactive discussion, especially when there are not that many people on the call. I think we can do that today. Okay, so not a perfect analogy, but that's how I tend to think about things from an environmental perspective. So anytime I go to a site, I imagine, okay, we have a bubble over the site. What's leaving that bubble? And that's what I'm most concerned about. Okay, so this particular site right here, they had their particular crisis was an industrial fire. And so something happened at the facility and the facility caught on fire and it turned into a massive fire. And we're going to chronicle everything that happened. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question, an interactive question. Joseph, I hope you chime in here also. What are the ways a pollutant could migrate through this bubble? What are the mediums that a pollutant could latch onto or use to get out of the bubble of the site?
Trash.
Trash? Okay, I like that. So Joseph, what do you mean when you say trash? What are you thinking?
But any kind of debris that might be sold could get into your system.
So you're thinking it goes out with the normal just trash collection or tell me more.
Oh, from your runoff.
From your road. Okay, so you're
Carry
thinking
from my property to the outside the bubble.
yeah. Okay, so surface water. So hey, you got a pollutant, it gets into the surface water, whether it's rainwater or processed water, and it's leaving via surface water. What are some other ways a pollutant could escape?
Traffic.
Okay, say more about that.
Just traffic, putting it, going out into the roads, so all the chemicals and everything.
Yeah, so it could leave via traffic. In fact, more and more we're seeing the concrete industry be cracked down just on vehicle tracking, right? EPD contacted me a couple weeks ago about, hey, we're at a concrete site and we see a whole lot of sediment being tracked out into the road. They got to fix this. So yeah, that's a good one. Vehicle. Any other thoughts about how it could escape this bubble?
I think if you have a fire and you're cleaning that material up and there's potentially hazardous materials that are in that cleanup that you're dealing with, that could be in the soil or it could be in the ash or whatever media it is that you're going to clean up when you're cleaning up for that mess, you have the potential to have some of that material be hazardous.
Absolutely. So Brett touched on a couple things. Hey, when you're just cleaning up, if you have a issue, so Joseph mentioned surface water. Okay, someone mentioned, vehicle tracking coming out, and then Brett saying, hey, you could get down in the soil, so it could actually escape out the bottom of the bubble if you have a pollutant that gets down in the soil and leaves the site, in the down gradient fashion. And then, in this situation with a fire, also you have the air, the smoke, the stack coming up, and it's escaping out of the top of the bubble. So, hey, we're going to talk about this particular case study and how we looked at each of those mediums. So air, water, air, and then water, surface water and groundwater, and then soil. And so, this is how I think about, once again, a site from an environmental perspective. Hey, in the event of a crisis, and I'm not just thinking about a crisis, I think about it all the time, but in the event of a crisis, how do we make sure that the air that's escaping that bubble, that the water that's escaping the bubble, or the soil that's escaping the bubble, that these are mitigated and they're not polluting the environment? Any comments or questions on that? Okay. And so let me just jump into this particular case study. So this, once again, it was an industrial fire. We got contacted right at lunchtime. I think I was eating lunch in the office, 12:33 p.m. They told us, hey, the site's on fire. We need a response. We mobilized to the subject property. And the first thing we did, once again, thinking about the soil, the water, and the air, was we prepared to start collecting water samples. Now, knowing that it's a fire, you're going to have a lot. What's the primary way you're going to have a pollutant escaping in the event of a fire?
Fire department water.
Air or water?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Fire department water. Actually, this fire is not the one we're talking about, but just a couple weeks ago, we had a fire in downtown Chattanooga, and it was an industrial site right on the river, and the fire department came in and, they just sprayed it down for hours. Well, where did all that fire department water go? It went right into the river in downtown Chattanooga. So when you're fighting a fire, the first thing you're going to think about is the surface water runoff from the firefighting water. And then secondly, air, and then third, soil. And so we prepared, okay, we know we're going to be taking surface water samples. Let's get our latex gloves. Let's get our ball mason jars that Bill just pointed out I was drinking out of. And then we're probably going to be down in the creek. So get your waterproof boots and waders on as well. Second thing we did, we contacted a contractor who provided the air monitoring equipment to set up throughout the subject property so we could take, ongoing measurements. And then soil, that was not so applicable here. The site was paved, and so anything that's happened is probably not getting down into the soil. And so water and air were going to be our primary focus. And so, okay, the fire's happening, 12 p.m. Now this fire goes until 3 a.m. that morning. They could not get the fire out. They brought in the local fire department, then they brought in the City of Atlanta Fire Department. Ultimately, they had to bring in the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport Fire Department because they had the foaming agents as part of their firefighting tools to take away all the oxygen from the fire. Okay, so while this was going on, what are we doing? Once again, I'm thinking about air, I'm thinking about water, and I'm thinking about soil. And so what we did was we continually monitored the stormwater outfalls and the receiving stream. Okay, so the whole team were placed at each outfall on the site, outfall being where the water could escape, and we're taking samples and we're monitoring the water that's coming off the site. And then the next thing we're doing is we have a person down actually in the receiving stream, at the receiving stream, and they're monitoring, okay, the water that's leaving the outfalls, what does it look like when it hits the creek? Do we have any sheen on it? Do we have any foam on it? Do we have any signs of negative effects, a fish kill or something like that in the state water? And so, over the course of 14 or 15 hours, we're taking continual rounds of sampling and setting those aside to have those analyzed. We don't just want a visual analysis or a sensory analysis. We want a quantitative laboratory analysis on this also. Oh, one other thing I just note here at the bottom is that we didn't just sample the site's outfalls and the receiving stream of the site. It was raining that night. And so we actually went up gradient of the site, and anything that was running into the storm system up gradient, we sampled that as well. It's a heavy industrial area. I didn't know what pollutants might be contributing to the receiving stream and to the site that had nothing to do with the site. And so we took up gradient samples also so that we could see, hey, are there pollutants that are contributing to the receiving stream and the outfalls that are unrelated to the site's activities?
Hey, John, real quick.
Yeah.
Is that something for that particular client that you have been doing in the past? Did you have any reference data of that? That was an interesting point to think about.
That's a great question. So this particular client, a lot of our clients, we manage their ongoing stormwater compliance. So performing their regular inspections or regular samplings and writing their stormwater plans and such. And so this is one of those clients. And so I already knew, hey, where is their receiving stream? Where are their outfalls? Where did their outfalls migrate into the subsurface storm sewer? And then where does that sewer discharge into the creek? So I was familiar enough with the site bill to know sort of the answers to the question. So we had a plan to put together. But one thing I want to talk about at the end of this is, hey, we all need to be thinking about putting these types of plans together for our sites, because you don't need it till you need it, but when you need it, you really need it.
Right.
Okay. So next thing we did, so EPA, they mobilized their emergency response units. And so it's really important when you have a regulatory agency on site and they're taking samples to always take split samples with them. And so you want to confirm when they're sampling something, you want to sample the same thing at the same time so you can contrast your data with their data. Hey, these regulatory agencies, they're not infallible. They make mistakes. You want to check their work, and they're fine with that also. It's not an adversarial thing. You want to check their work and make sure, okay, both sets of data are accurate and in accordance with each other. And so the team is taking split samples with the EPA. They're there in the outfalls. They're there in the creek also off and on. Okay, and the other thing we did was we ordered multiple vac trucks to capture the water as it's migrating through the outfalls. So we got frac trailers stored, they got dropped off. I think Granger dropped them off at the site. And we have multiple vacuum trucks that are there that are sucking up as much water as possible as it's leaving the site. So we got the firefighting water, it's flowing. They're vacuuming it up as much as possible. They're catching as much as possible. Here's some pictures I took that night. You see the frac trailer being dropped off on the left and the vacuum truck right there. This guy's working hard to vacuum it up. Okay, let me just mention something about this. And this is something that, I wind up talking to companies about often and this happened in Chattanooga a couple weeks ago. It was, hey, John, we don't want to spend $3,000 to have a frac trailer dropped off in an emergency situation. And we don't want to spend $1,700 to have this vac truck come in an emergency situation. We don't think it's actually going to do that much good anyway, because we got so much water flowing off the site. But the important thing to realize is often these situations are death by 1,000 paper cuts. You may not solve all the problems, but if you can catch some of that water and store it in the frac tank, and you can vacuum up any sheen or anything as it's leaving the sites, each one of these things matters. And the regulatory agencies are paying attention also. Hey, are you taking this issue seriously? And so each one of these issues also shows, hey, the company, we don't mess around. We do take these things seriously. When there is an emergency, we respond accordingly. Any questions about the surface water? And then we're going to move to air. Okay. So let's talk.
John, it's Brett. Sorry, I couldn't get to my unmute. I do actually have a question. So the multi-sector industrial stormwater permit for the state of Georgia has an allowable discharge of non-stormwater for firefighting activities. Yep. Can you explain how it would be non-compliant to have a discharge of firefighting water when it's excluded, it's allowable non-stormwater discharge in our state permit?
Sure. They allow firefighting water to be discharged, Brett, but if there is a sheen on that firefighting water, they can call that a reportable spill. Or if the water is heavy, if it's got lead, cadmium, chromium, in the concrete situation, maybe cement, whatever it is, if the firefighting water leaves the site, it's not a problem. But if the firefighting water is picking up pollutants from the site, then it becomes a problem. good question.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would like to have further discussions with EPD on that because it's not written into the state permit in that level of detail. And it's an EPD's permit, right? Because it's a National Pollution Elimination Discharge System. So it is an EPD's permit, which includes pollutants. So I'd be interested in understanding a little bit more detail in that, especially with the state, because you read the permit, it seems like if you're having a fire, you're exempt.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit like, irrigation water or dust control water. You're allowed to use them, but if you're picking up lead or you're picking up pollutants that are endangering the local environment, then they will have an issue with that. Okay, air. So what do? We installed 5 hydrostatic test pumps set up in and around the property to perform continual monitoring. We put them upwind and downwind of the fire so that once again, we want to quantify the difference because this is a heavy industrial area. What may be contributing to the air that's not related to us? Okay, which way is the wind blowing? Let's put some upwind, let's put some downwind of the site. And then, once again, I want to point out EPA, they had their emergency response team out. They had their own air monitoring equipment. They actually ordered a shelter in place for the local community. And when I dug in, hey, why? What's the shelter in place? What's the reason for this? It turns out their monitoring equipment wasn't working, that the rain was affecting their monitoring equipment. And they said, hey, we just think, it's best to go ahead and do the shelter in place. And it was like, well, okay, but that's a subjective call. That's not based on quantitative data. So we just want to clarify that. Okay, and then soil, the site is on concrete, so soil was not an issue. Nothing was able to migrate in the downward gradient and affect the soil. Everything was caught right there on concrete and escaped via the surface. Okay, conclusions. And so what are the questions we want answered at the end of a crisis like this? Was a reportable quantity released via surface water? So Brett's saying, hey, we can send firefighting water offsite. Absolutely. But if you have a reportable quantity of a pollutant that's leaving the site via that firefighting water, it could be an issue. And so since we took all those samples, we were able to quantify, hey, we sent this many gallons of water off the site. Here is what the test results were, of that water, and then do the calculation. No reportable quantity was released. Same thing for the air, no reportable quantity. Permissible exposure limits, this is OSHA for air where they exceeded off-site. We were able to quantify that from the air testing equipment. The answer was no. Ambient air standards exceeded, no. And then were proper environmental mitigation activities implemented? The answer is yes. Okay, we got the frac tanks, we got the vac trucks, we're taking the samples. The way you want to think about these things is each one is a bullet in the gun. And the more ammunition you have, the better off you are, because then you can show, hey, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things to mitigate this. We were on top of it. If you're not taking action, that's when a regulatory agency tends to get concerned and thinks, okay, we need to step in and do more and oversee this and maybe take some enforcement action. Okay, so that's from the conclusions from this particular case study. And now I just want to give a few recommendations that may be helpful to be thinking about for your particular subject properties, what to do before a crisis. So Bill, this gets back to your question. Hey, some of these things you need to know the sites to know what to do. And so, a few things that are worthwhile. Know where your stormwater outfalls are located. Joseph and I love riding around and seeing sites for the Wayne Davis yards. And one thing I always like to know is, hey, does the site manager, does he know where his outfalls are located? Because, hey, where you're going to take samples of your surface water runoff, even if it's not stormwater, just firefighting water, that's all going to get to your outfalls. And if you don't know where your outfalls are, you're not going to know where to take samples from. Okay, then to take it one step further off the site, hey, where does that outfall send the water? In other words, where is your receiving stream? So it may be 100 yards away from the site. It may be 500 yards away from the site. It may be a mile away from the site. It may run through a ditch for a whole mile before it gets to a receiving stream. But you need to know, hey, what's the state water that ultimately receives the water that's running off of my site? Because every site ultimately gets to a state water, whether it's a lake, a creek, a river, or the coast in some situations. Okay, have an emergency response plan in place. So, hey, if we have a fire like this, or if we have some crisis, what are we going to do? Who are we going to call? What's the action plan going to be for the sampling of the stormwater, for the sampling of the surface water runoff, the air, the soil? Have an emergency response plan in place. Know an environmental consultant you can call in the event of an emergency that can perform these samplings, and get as many of the site personnel trained up to just be at least familiar with this stuff as possible. Once again, it doesn't seem important until it's very important. So this is what you want to do, some things to think about before a crisis. And Bill, to your question, I already had this map drawn up of the site prior to this fire. So I knew, hey, their receiving stream is right here. The site is down here in red. Outfall 4 is where the fire water was going to be discharged. So we need to be there and we need to be here. We had this plan in place prior to the fire happening, which is why we were able to respond accordingly.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm in my years of managing concrete operations, I hadn't given or really had a situation where a neighboring property was actually, discharging, or there were concerning materials coming onto our place. So do you encounter that very often? In other words, you understand the question?
I know exactly what you're asking, Bill, and I see it often. I will say, the concrete industry, a lot of the concrete sites are located in a little more remote areas. And so often, I'm thinking through our concrete sites. We have some that are in sort of densely populated areas, but often they're in more remote areas because the truck can get in and get out, and they don't have to be right there next to a massive customer base. But so the ones that are in heavily populated areas, it is not uncommon to have upgradient influences coming down onto their site that could contribute it. And not just concrete sites, I see it in all of the industrial sector. I always check, hey, what are the upgradient influences that may feed it? This one actually has this site right here to the left, which is an old chemical manufacturing facility, which has since closed down. And they still have pollution issues that are running down gradient to the right, intersecting this storm sewer and discharging into the receiving stream. And actually, this local municipality called me one time and said, hey, we think that this company is sending all of these pollutants into the stream. It turns out that was not the case. It was this company that was up gradient that was doing it. Good question, though.
I have a question, John. This is Brett.
Yeah.
My question is, with this particular incident, you mentioned that Atlanta Hartsfield had to respond with aircraft firefighting, and they needed the foam to get the fire put out.
Yeah.
When you were doing your monitoring for the runoff, did you consider, or did you look for PFAS and PFOA substances, being that there was foam used? And was that something that the EPA asked about? I guess it would be predicated on whether or not this incident happened before or after, prior to or after the listing of those compounds.
We did consider it. We did test for it, and sure enough, the EPA did ask for it. And you're exactly right. It was because of the foaming agents. Okay, so and by the way, Brett, that's going to get to something, we're going to talk about, which is, and I have it here. Do I have it? Let's see. Maybe I don't have it. To that point right there, it's very important to collect all of the documents, including the MSDS sheets, for everything that was used, both your own product that's on site, our cement, our aggregate, our sand, whatever we have MSDS sheets for, and then any product that was used to fight the fire. In that situation, Brett, that foaming agent, to find out, hey, are there pollutants in that foaming agent that are unrelated to our activities? Okay, so that's pre-fire or pre-crisis, I should say. This applies to more than just a fire, any crisis. Okay, recommendation for your subject property during the crisis. Okay, take constant photographs / videos to record all site activities. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client tell me they've called me after the fact, they've had some issue, EPA, the state, someone's been there, and I'll ask them, hey, did you take any photographs during, the crisis? No, we were too busy. We didn't think about it. And so essentially what happens is we wind up, with he said versus she said, or the regulatory agency are the ones that took all the photographs. We don't have anything confirming it on our end. Very important to take constant photographs or video and videos throughout the crisis. Keep the lines of communication open with EPA, the state agency, the fire department. They also often have, very useful information and are more than willing to share it. Hey, here's what we're seeing in our data. Here's what's something to be thinking about. So you want to be talking to those guys and girls throughout the process. Take split samples anytime that a regulatory agency samples, and you probably even want to go above and beyond and take more samples, and then go above and beyond to protect the receiving streams and surrounding properties. That gets back to the frac tanks, the vac trucks. You want to put on a show. You want to show, hey, I'm serious about this. We do not take this lightly. And there it is, Brett. Vac trucks and frac trailers, even though MSDS for foam was harmless. They told us, hey, we got the MSDS for the foam. I don't care. Let's get the vac trucks out here. Let's get the frac trailers or frac tanks out here. And then consult the emergency response plan if you have one, just to make sure you didn't miss anything. These things are crazy in the moment. You want to double check your work and just make sure, hey, have I missed anything important? Okay. So that's during the fire. Now, recommendations for after the fire. I know we're running a little short on time, so I'll run through this. Okay, after the crisis happens, what do you want to do? The first thing you want to do is you want to collect all the documents as quickly as possible. So go to everybody that was at the site. Hey, did you take pictures? Send me your pictures. Let's get all the pictures in one place. Okay, hey, did we do laboratory analysis on the air, on the water? Let's get all of that laboratory data in one place. You don't want to try to track these things down 2 months after, the fact. You want to get it all together as soon as possible. Do we have any, firsthand accounts of the inspections while they were happening? So maybe it's, worthwhile to interview your employees, the site employees, or even the regulatory agency. Hey, I remember talking to Hugh at EPD. Hey, Hugh, tell me, you were down at the creek. Tell me exactly what you saw. While it's fresh in your head, I want to know what you saw that night. And he said, John, we saw some foam, but the MSDS for the foam was clear. There were no issues. There was no fish kill. Okay, he was willing to put that on record, immediately. And then, collect the invoices for all the work that was performed related to the fire or the crisis. We had another crisis a short time ago, a client right down in Mobile Bay. They had there was an oil slick a mile long down Mobile Bay. Coast Guard didn't know who it was from. They were going to all the companies on the bay and telling them, hey, check all your equipment, see who's discharging this. And my client jumped on it. They went above and beyond. They blocked off the whole portion of the bay that they discharged to with booms to make sure if there was anything escaping their side, it wouldn't get to it. They called in, I think a similar situation, they called in a vac truck to vacuum out all of their stormwater lines just to make sure if there was anything in there, it wasn't, that it got caught. And then when ADEM came back after the Coast Guard and was asking everybody, hey, what's the action you took? my client produced all the invoices. Hey, look at all this money we spent to protect the bay. And ADEM said, yeah, you're the least of our concern. We're going to move on and look at other potential sources. Monitor the receiving stream. Once again, sheen, fish kills. And then, hey, if it's something like this in a highly populated area, you probably want to engage the local community. The day after this fire, I went in and met with the neighborhoods that were, adjacent to this and just let them know, hey, here's exactly what happened. Here's what we did from an environmental perspective. There was no sheen that got to your creek. I just sort of tried to keep them in the loop so they weren't confused and they knew what was going on also. And here are just some pictures after the fact. We documented these the next day just to show, hey, no sheen was escaping the property. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'll take questions. I know we just got a few minutes, but any questions y'all have, would love to, chat about them.
I've got a question, and it goes back to the beginning when I was referring to Kevin's talk yesterday and the exposure that our members face, our producer members face with their tankers and concrete mixers out on the roadway. But give us a feel for the kinds of exposure, the financial exposure to the mismanagement of our environmental processes on our concrete plants, and to give us a sense of, you're talking about, hey, let's spend some money, let's get our optics right, which how is that a prudent thing to do in light of what the exposure is? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. So this particular situation, Bill, they so amidst everything that was done, and you can see that a lot of action was taken. The EPD came back and said, hey, we're good. We're not going to issue any fines. We're not going to issue any notices of violation. It's clear, action was taken. The environment was protected. EPA came back and they issued I think it was an $88,000 bill, not as a fine, but as, hey, here is what it cost us to send out our emergency response team.
Wow.
And so because they had to, put out a 24-hour team. They had put out air monitoring, they put out surface water monitoring. So they issued an $88,000 bill to cover their costs. Now, Bill, I got to tell you, it totally depends. It's up to the discretion of the agency. And so, we had a situation out in St. Louis recently where it wasn't even an emergency response situation. It was just a one-off inspection, and they just had some small things that were not in place. They got an $80,000 fine because they said their outfalls were marked in the wrong locations and, a few other small issues. The one down in Mobile, I mean, that could have turned into a multi-million-dollar fine. I'm not sure who the source of that oil slick was, but once a sheen leaves the subject property, the regulatory agency has discretion to say that's a reportable spill. They can come in and send their own emergency response units to do a full-fledged cleanup and then send that bill to the company. And so, these things can be very expensive, very, very expensive. But if you jump on it and you take quick action and you try to do all the work so they don't have to, you can come out not unscathed, but you can minimize the damage.
Hey, Brett, I'm curious, just from your involvement, in our industry in particular, can you just throw out some, common fine magnitudes and, from your experience, do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the fines that I've seen are that are coming from Georgia, the state of Georgia. If you get a fine, they're fairly minimal. But any fine is bad. I would say under $10,000, and some of them even under $1,000. if you get a notice of violation. I'm not saying these are all process water related or stormwater related. I've had an EPA matter that I spent a great deal of time trying to solve and fix. And ultimately that was an $83,000 fine. And that was back in 2017. And that was a result of a hurricane causing alleged release. So I've seen kind of the range. I've not seen a whole lot of fines in any of the things that I've touched that were in excess of $100,000.
Right.
But certainly it's possible. And I know clients, old clients and people that I've worked with that have experienced that for sure. The ultimate high dollar project that I would say I was heavily involved with was, in some instances you can have, a huge amount of contamination and you end up having to establish a trust that's over $1 billion is for huge chemical companies and stuff. And then they're responsible to be cleaned up over time. So it's just, it's all across the board. The way the fines have been ratcheting up, though, I think with the federal government, because it needs money, I would say that everybody probably needs to at least have a plan and be prepared.
And I'll just second that, Bill, exactly what Brett's saying. I'm seeing the federal side ratchet up and be more aggressive on the fines than they used to be. I mean, this is just getting stricter and stricter. And I'm seeing EPA, hit people for small issues, what I would consider small. They're not even pollution issues. They're potential to pollute issues. And yet I'm seeing big fines come across the board. $50,000 to $100,000.
Thank you.
Well, Emily, that's all I got for you and Bill. Any further questions from anybody on this before we call it a day?
No, I appreciate it.
Joseph?
I think
Well,
Joseph.
very good. Very good. And again, we've Emily's recording all of these now, and so they'll be posted to our website, I believe, into YouTube, probably Facebook. And just again, thank you to John, and to Brett, and to the team, the committee. And I'm excited about these going forward, that we continue to bring very meaningful, pragmatic information to the members to do the right thing, of course, first and foremost for our communities that we're in, but also certainly to achieve that prosperity component of our mission, to keep from paying out heavy fines. So thanks again, John.
Bill, it's my pleasure. Thank you to you and the team, and for all the questions and everybody that chimed in with comments. I loved it, and happy to do more of these in the future, just as needed.
Well, very good. See
Thank
you
you,
next
John.
time.